So I would like to ask you guys to introduce with one sentence and maybe why you think you're an expert on any of those.
Hi, so I'm Andrzej. I work with Rails for over 10 years now. So I think in this panel I might be more of the Rails expert side, not really on the CQRS side. My experience with CQRS and event sourcing is only 1 year, and it's mostly thanks to Mirek. So I thought that I can be a good connector between the Rails and the CQRS worlds. And I think that we, as a Rails community, we can gain really a lot from CQRS. That was my topic of the last year, and we've tried that in many projects recently, and it seems to bring really good results for Rails applications.
Wait, what do you mean by Rails? PHP?
Sorry, PHP applications. Yeah. I'm a PHP expert, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
So hi, yeah, I also like the acronyms a lot, so that's why I write PHP a lot too. So yeah, about the topics of the panel, the one I have worked with or have more experience with is event sorting. On the platform we are building a ride. I'm in charge of the part where we bill or charge customers. So for those types of applications, event sourcing is really useful because you know that working with, for example, with payment gateways, there's not such thing as the unique truth or the unique truth basically. So having a system that is based on event sourcing for handling payments and billing, it's really useful to understand what's going on with a specific client, especially when they need support and they want to know what's going on with their accounts. We can talk more about that later.
That was more than 2 sentences, but thanks anyway.
Hi everybody, I'm Alberto, and I think the thing I'm focusing most in understanding complexity of the system. I'm a lot into domain-driven design, and I use the various styles of domain-driven design, but mostly as a way to decompose and understand problem. Then making it right. If I do my work well, making the system right and work fast becomes almost trivial because we like to make the problem a little bit more complicated than it really is, so that we could look brilliant when we solve it, and that's my job.
Hi, I'm Mirek. I wasn't here last year because that time I was still .NET developer. So you can expect that Andrzej didn't hire me because of my Rails or PHP skills. So I'm interested a lot in event sourcing and CQRS, and that's my thing, my mindset. I want to persuade guys to use, and I hope to teach them some.
So, but can you define in 2 sentences, no more, not too long sentences, what is event sourcing?
Event sourcing is storing data of your application not as a current state, but a series of events that will allow you to go to the current state you have.
Okay. And can you explain what is CQRS?
Let's see.
That's difficult. So I'll try to simplify it a bit.
What does the acronym stand for?
It's a command query responsibility segregation. To put it very simple, you try to divide your system into the read parts and the write parts. And in this, I think in its root, it's about it, because event sourcing is an addition to that. So it's basically about having commands in your system, and the commands, they just change the data, they don't return the data. And then you have queries, and the queries only return the data. So, and usually you have different models for the write part and different models for the read part.
Yeah, I was scared. No models?
Yeah. No, but can I add something? The thing is, you normally tell a small portion of the system to do something, add an item to cart, and then you read about many things like pricing, catalog, whatever. This part has no behavior, so there is no point in creating an object for just looking at the data. And you need the object for the behavior part. So that, oh, why keeping the two things together? Does it make any sense?
Yeah, it's also hard to explain the CQRS pattern to the Rails developers because the Rails developers don't feel the pain the other developers like .NET feel because we have a lot of layers when you have UI, some kind of adapter, application service layer, domain layer, data access layer. And if you want to have an application structure like this, and you have the both parts, write side and read side, that need to go through all the layers, you have a lot of code just switching the layers. In that time, situation, the CQRS with reads are simple. Just go and read the data from the database and show them to the user. And the write is more complicated. When you post the command, you do something, you have your domain, you have your validation there, some use of the services, and it stores the command. Then CQRS makes a lot more sense, and it's much easier to explain why you need that.
And why not just use active record and models?
Active record is not a solution. It never is.
Okay, what about DDD? What is DDD?
Well, I thought I said something about it yesterday. Now, somebody
But
from the audience.
everyone just remember Cucumber.
Okay.
No, but but can you give us like a one-sentence definition of DDD? What does DDD even stand for?
It's something that we don't use in the Rails world.
Good definition.
An approach that puts the learning before the coding together with the coding. It's not like a tiny waterfall. It's just like the learning part is more important than just writing the code that does it. Understanding what is the real problem, it becomes crucial if the problem is complex or if the domain is evolving. That's a key thing. Then the how is just up to us.
Okay. Do you guys want to add something?
Yes. So I wanted to ask to you guys that have way more experience in this than me. Have you had successful experiences implementing one of like these patterns, if you can call them like that, on a Ruby application? Doesn't have to be Rails. Like it can be like with any framework, even like custom made, homebrewed. Do you guys have any experience to share? Successful experience?
I think Mirek can share his experience.
We have, I think there's no obstacles to use this, any of these patterns in any technology. There is no problem. You can do this is just way of doing the things. It's not depending on the technology. So you can use anything for this. I have a simple present Rails application with the CQRS and event sourcing. It's like several lines of code, nothing more.
Yeah, maybe I wasn't clear. I mean, I'm not asking because in Ruby you can't like apply those patterns. It's more like the most popular tools don't enforce them. Like Rails has its own way of doing things. And for example, web frameworks like Sinatra are like too open to do whatever you want. So that's why I was asking. Like I wanted to know a little bit how you like implemented it, because it's like getting out of the like, for example, in Rails, the Rails way, and doing it your way. And how did you manage to do that? And do you think like the trade-off made it worth doing it differently from what Rails tells you to do?
So in one of our projects, we started with a typical Rails way foundation of the project. It was a legacy app. And I think the first step we did was introducing service objects, and then we introduced repository objects, and then we used adapter objects. And that helps a lot, but it's still not like the final solution, like something that is really good enough. I think what was helping us in this project was at some point we introduced domain events. So whenever something interesting in the domain happened, in the domain as in the Rails way, so in the active records probably, so we introduced the event bus and the event store, and we propagated the event. So if any other part of the application is interested in that, we could do something with this. So once we introduced the domain events, suddenly more parts of the system started using them, and that was a good improvement. But just to please remember, it was a legacy Rails application, a typical Railsway, a huge application. So it was a mess at the beginning. So whatever we do, it was an improvement.
Yeah, the main events are the game changer here.
Talking about technology, the software I'm writing for my own company, so nobody's paying me for doing that, but I'm writing it. It's just based on Sinatra, and nothing more than this. We created our own little library for managing event sourcing, aggregates, and repository. But the amount of code is not that much. What we experienced was that it took me a lot of time to make all the pieces fit together, because I was fairly new to Ruby and I wanted to learn them, to practice and to suffer. I decided it, and I also use Cucumber for this. But that's another story. The effort that we had was adding a new requirement had the kind of a cost that was going down over time. While normally with apps that you keep adding things with a model that is strongly tied to the database, well, the first two or three use cases are really quick and straightforward. The Railsway is exactly perfect for this. But then the time needed grows and grows and grows. Then you feel like, oh, house of cards, pile of shit, whatever. It just feels like, for me, it's just exactly the opposite. I struggle at the beginning, and then, okay, I can add a new requirement. I ask my stakeholder in some other project, well, please, more requirements, just like Bruce Lee, you know.
Okay, guys. We have quite a few implementation questions, basically. So let's start with the questions from the hackpad. So first one is, do we need event sorting with CQRS?
No, you don't. You can just use CQRS. You can even just use CQRS with any data store, like SQL store, no problem. I think it's the opposite way. If you want to have event sourcing, it's better to have CQRS.
For me, it's even more generic. Like, well, the answer is no. It's just a good fit. I like using it, but of course, I don't choose just because of my preferences. The other thing I do is just I investigate the system using what I called yesterday conceptual CQRS, try to understand where the read model is different from the write model. But if they're not that different, if I'm just collecting, an address book, well, the two things are going to be probably the same, so I don't even implement it in CQRS. But I still use CQRS mindset for the investigation. I want to see if the two things are really divergent. If they are, I go for strong CQRS implementation. If they're not, well, there are cheapest way to do that.
So what is the best time to introduce DDD, CQRS, and ES? At which state of a business? At the very beginning, in the middle, at the end? Doesn't matter?
I usually deal with legacy Rails applications, so I think very often it could be a good fit to introduce some of the techniques. So the question, if, for example, do we want to start with those techniques at the beginning of, of a Rails application? Excuse me. I think that it might be a good idea once you're familiar with those concepts, because if you want to learn CQRS and event sourcing and DDD and start a new application, then people will complain that you're slow. But once you know it, I think it's a good idea. That there's this initial learning part which is slow. There is some initial learning about the implementation. What is the event store? What are the important building blocks of an event store? But once you know it and once you have it implemented, once you can reuse the event store, I think it's a good start. So I really loved the part about Alberto's talk yesterday when Alberto made the connection between gathering the requirements and implementing the code. So it doesn't matter at which point of your application you are. If you have certain domain events which are important, like the order is completed or the invoice is sent, then you are already using those events. So it doesn't matter if you start with them or introduce them later. I think it might be better to actually start with them as well. So, and then you build the code around those events. And it's a much different way of working, of implementing the code as we are used to in the Rails community. But I know that for some of you, those concepts sounds like, I don't know, we are some kind of architecture astronauts here. But in the end, it's actually much simpler architecture. You have events, commands, you have event handlers, command handlers. It's actually a much simpler way to think about the application.
I would say that starting with the DDD, as is any other IT questions, the correct answer is it depends. When you don't know your domain, when you just need to do some prototype, go with Rails and try to prototype. Be prepared to throw away the prototype and do it right way again. If you know that your domain is complex, that you have a complex business logic, and this is a core of your system, this is the part when the money is counting. Probably it's good to start from scratch with the DDD.
Isn't this something, I mean, like the necessity of use, for example, CQRS, isn't it something that emerges from the application? I mean, is it easy or even possible to know beforehand, before building it, that you are going to benefit from it? Or is it something that you realize as you go, okay, so this will be much easier if I use CQRS?
There is a two blog posts of Udi Dahan when he tried to answer these questions. One is when you should not use CQRS, and the second one is when you should always use CQRS. I think the only domain that if you will not have any advantage of using CQRS is just CRUD domain. When you have CRUD application, but very simple CRUD application. In other applications, I think even if the domain logic is not complex, the separation of the reads and writes will give you some more advantages just that's justified to use it. And if you get used to domain events, you will see some more possibilities for the use of the domain events that will allow you to think differently and structure the application differently. For example, you can just go and use microservices.
I can add one thing. I've been many times in the situation when someone shows me the application, the Rails application, and they tell me, this is a simple CRUD application. We don't want really anything fancy here, any kind of architecture here. And then I look to the code and I see, okay, so this is CRUD, but then you have those callbacks in the models, right? Oh yeah, we have a couple of them. Okay, and those callbacks trigger different things, so they change the state of the model, right? Oh yeah, they do change the state. Oh, so you have a state machine gem here. Okay, so now you have transitions. Then I look at the transition, it's like 200 lines of code. And obviously state machine in the Rails world means that it's coupled to the persistence as well. And then actually when you look closer, it seems that they use single table inheritance. And so you have callbacks, single table inheritance, and state machine together. And people claim that it's still a simple CRUD application. And it's not.
That's one little thing. Well, maybe two. One is there is no clear definition of what is the right CQRS implementation. Like you might have many different levels, and the simplest thing is just to separate the facade of the commands to the facade of the reads, so that you understand you have one type of operation and you have another type of operation. Just understanding things differently. And then you might go and separate things at the architectural layer, but still going on the same database. Then you might go and split in the database, and then you might go in for a strong denormalization of the database on the read side if you need them. The thing is, you can get to the place you need step by step, and not just deciding this from the beginning. But when you said, can we understand that in advance? Well, that's one of the things I really try to do in my event storming workshop. One of the cases might be like you have this orange ticket, which is a domain event. Anybody cares about this item added to cart? And you have the people around it. I do care. When something happens like this, I need to, let's say, pre-book the item in the warehouse. Okay, I need it too because we are collecting stats about the items which are more likely to be bought, and you see the people, you see that okay, so this event is going to be relevant for this portion of the system, this portion of the system, and this portion of the system, and so you can see a lot of this potential complexity in advance.
Okay, question from the audience.
Okay, so it might be a tricky one about event sourcing, but before I ask my real question, I wanted to be clear that my assumption is right, that do you all prefer Git over SVN? Is that right?
What does that have to do?
Yeah, you'll see. So basically, if I thought about it, if you think about the main difference between Git and SVN, the essential difference lays in the representation of all the code changes. And in Git, you have basically snapshots of all the states in the system. And SVN is clearly event sourcing mechanism where you just have those diffs, which are events that say what happened. And for some reason, all of us, almost all of us, prefer Git over SVN. And so why, for this system, it's better not to use event sourcing? And so basically, the question would be here, for what kinds of applications you think it would be better not to do that and not to use event sourcing?
My answer is not going to be technical at all, but it's like it's the same position as the user of your application is. So as developers, we're just the users of Git. We don't care how it's implemented actually. So we just use Git because it gives us some tools gives us tools that makes our job easier, and that's why we like it more. I'm talking about me. That's why I like it more than SVN. I don't care if it's one is even sourcing or not. I don't care at a low level how they're doing what they do. I might care at some point, but as long as it works as I expect and it gives me the tools I need to make my job easier, I'm fine. I'm fine with however the designer decided to implement it. So I think it's I think that that's why we might choose a tool that's not implementing event sourcing behind the curtains, to say it somehow.
I just wanted to add that I think that it has some implications, for example, performance. So basically the biggest difference in Git is mainly because it doesn't have to revert all those events in order to get to some old commit, or if you want to create a new branch, then it's also easier. So I think it also has some implications the way it was implemented.
As far as I know, snapshotting is a technique that is very common to use together with event sourcing. So I don't think they're that much different here.
But then I totally agree. You can use snapshot. You just use when it's needed for performance issue, and it's funny because every developers always look to this problem, to find a solution to a problem before having the problem, because most of the aggregates and things in the system don't have this need. An order probably has 3, 4, maybe 6, 7 events, not 100 events for a single order. It depends of course, on the decomposition, and we get into decomposition of smaller state machines, not the big order class from inception to payment to delivery. They're probably separate things. Just everybody calls them orders. But you said something that was really interesting behind the scene about what is the underlying model. But when it comes to business, the idea of thread of events is just unique. So it's very hard. It might be in some specific domains, but normally you don't have the idea of branching, merging, and things like this. If you have your bank account, which is by default implemented in event sourcing, and you also have the snapshot, which is the monthly statement, and then you add the operation you did over the month, so you have the good trade-off. Then you wouldn't want to have anything like, yes, we merge your bank account with another alternative path and doing things together. This type of sequential thing is embedded in the domain most of the time, but not in everyone. So sometimes even those abstraction might be really, really good.
So isn't the read models what we want to achieve at the end? We have events, we have event snapshots, but we want to achieve situation when we put the stuff from the read model, the last known state, which we have. Isn't that's what he's asking about? This performance issue when we have read model based on events? Isn't it performing?
No, it's not. Because if you think about the read model is significant for the reader. And it's normally not the consequence of only one single aggregate, of one single stream of events. If we want to have a read model for a tough decision, you might have even like a document with just a complicated structure of things that could be grouped together, but that don't belong at the execution level to the same aggregate or even to the same bounded context. It's just useful to put them together for the reader. And it's just quicker for the reader to be able to access all the things in one single click. Of course, you're bringing more complication to the projection, which are generating the read model, but it's just a case-by-case trade-off you might choose. And it might also keep the old relational schema for the read model or move to document or to graph-based database. Just depends on what do you need to read and how much money the customer wants to put on that specific feature.
It took me a very long time to really understand, well, I'm not sure I still understand it fully, but to understand event sourcing, and Mirek was very patient in explaining me all of that. Thank you. But the part when I actually got it was to understand that it's not that we are event sourcing the whole system. It's not that we are replaying all of the events for every command. It's about grouping those events around aggregate. And aggregate is a concept that you all have in your applications. It's like, for example, the order in the application or the user sometimes. And you only need the sub-part of the events that are related to this aggregate. So each event has this like order ID, for example, and it's only those that are interesting. So we don't really put the whole state of the whole application up. And this is where it might be different to how SVN and Git, what they do. Usually when you use a code base, you don't want to have a state of just one file or just one class. You need to have the whole repository of your code. So maybe this is where you actually need to have the snapshotting and you need to load the state of the full of everything what's there. And usually in your applications, you don't have this need. You have just, usually your order aggregate has like, I don't know, 10, 20 events, nothing more than that.
Usually in your aggregate has a lot of events, then your aggregate is too big.
So, but is it then mandatory to have snapshots or aggregations, or can you live without that?
Of course not. It's not mandatory. Till now, I never be forced to use snapshot. Never need it yet.
Okay, so let's go on with the questions from the hackpad.
Just one little thing. What's setting up the snapshot is really easy. It's probably, let's say 10, 20 lines of code. It's not a big deal. So don't be worried about the snapshot.
So where would you start when implementing event sourcing? What would you do first if you were to implement event sourcing into an existing application?
There's quite some concepts that you need to understand when you do it. As I said before, I would start with domain events at the beginning, and only then, at some point, introduce event sourcing. So event sourcing, the meaning that you build the state from the events. Usually, if you have an existing application, you have no events at all. So you first need to start building them so that you can use them. It's good to get familiar with what is an event store and what are the possible current implementations and what tools are existing right now. At some point, you need to store the events somewhere, and you need to project the data from those event stores somehow. So yeah, I think it's good to start with some reading first. There are very good books like the Red Book, the Implementing DDD book is really great for introducing event sourcing and the DDD patterns. And then we have those two, or probably more, but those are the most famous, like Greg Young and Udi Dahan. They have really great blogs about those topics, so it's good to follow them.
I think you always need to start with the domain events because this is what will be stored. So the first thing is to introduce the domain events. The second step is to change your application to have all the state changes in your aggregates made only on application of domain events. So if you have any change of state that it's not which is not source from this any event, then you are not still ready for event sourcing. Or all the change of state must have a reason, must have an event that is a reason to change. Only if you have this, you can introduce the event sourcing.
Talking about tools, do you need, so 2 questions here. Do you need a special tool for event sourcing? And the other one is, if we should use Greg's event store.
Of course, you need something special, but the something special, it can be just 2 tables or even just 1 table in your SQL store and implement the event store by yourself. It's not that hard. Actually, not that hard in the beginning, but later maybe harder. There are some gems on GitHub, even in Rabbit, so you can try to. Of course, you can use the Greg's event store. There is a HTTP API, so you can try to use it.
Yeah, so there are basically 2 ways, just to simplify it a bit. You can either have the event store as part of your database, and you have just special tables for storing events. And the second approach is to go with the Greg's event store. It's called Greg's event store because Greg Young is the author, and it's like a separate service that you use. You can install it on your server and use it. There are several gems, as Mirek said, but none of them actually seems to be ready. So it seems like everyone who starts playing with CQRS and event sourcing, at some point they build their own event store, but it's usually incomplete. So current state is really not very stable.
So do you have any experience with Greg's event store?
I don't have that much experience.
Still not production experience. Still looking for a project that I will be able to introduce the Greg event stores. Maybe Alberto?
I have customers which are using them, but no direct experience. But they were kind of happy.
So would you recommend running that under Linux with Mono?
I would not point. No. Sorry, I'm not saying no. I'm just saying I can't recommend that. The thing I might recommend is they did a lot of work at the level of machine sympathy, so the code is really, really optimized for running on a physical machine and not on a virtual one. So if you want to get all the performance boost that they've been working on, just go for that direction, because they did something really special on that, and having a different type of implementation and deployment, it was maybe losing most of the fun.
Also, we're working on as Arkansas, so a bit of a self-promotion here. We're working on HTTP bindings to the Greg's event store, so it should be available soon. Because the Greg's event store allows you to connect in 2 different ways. One is the typical HTTP and ATOM protocol, and the other is TCP based. And there's another gem that I've seen just recently that someone did the Ruby bindings to the TCP one. TCP is probably faster, but it's just more work to implement. And I'm not sure if the gem that is available right now is really stable.
It's even in the documentation and event store that the preferred way of using event store, Greg event store, is HTTP access. Only if you need better performance, then you should consider the TCP.
And HTTP one, I think they claim in the documentation that they process 2,000 events per second. So if your application has less than that, then you should be fine.
I think, going back to the question, I think it doesn't matter if you use the Greg event store on Windows or Linux. It probably will be still more performant than any event store you will do it by yourself.
Okay. Another question regarding implementations. How do you version or migrate events?
Okay, that's a very specific one, but no. In this case, I would point you to some people like Greg Young again, or Yves Renault on the DDD CQRS mailing list, because there are quite a few strategies for doing this, but it really depends a lot on how much control do you have, if it's something that happens in your bounded context or not, how long is its time span, and what is the change. So you might have safe areas where you can enforce a policy like everything you have is last version, having interceptors at the boundaries of your bounded context, but really there are quite a few different possibilities. So I wouldn't like to answer to this one in detail, but I would point you to people that really manage these things in long-lasting projects. And probably the most interesting answer comes from Yves Renault, that worked on a system like this for more than 10 years. So he saw the whole lifetime. And I think that's where I would point you.
I also have always a doubt. If you need a versioning of events, if it's really the same event, maybe it's completely different event when you need to change it.
Yep. The thing is, people kept calling it the same event, and then the reason why it changes was because maybe you learned something more, maybe something happened, maybe it's semantically different, and you have to explore all the different possibilities. No, it's not like rule of thumb. It's just, no, we might get giving different answer depending on that specific event. And this really changed a lot. Not a simple recipe, I have to admit, but that's life.
Can you tell us what you understand under event streams?
Well, well, not that much, because I honestly didn't understand the question.
So what are event streams?
Oh, basically just the flow of events that you can read related to a given aggregate, and the sequence that happen connected to the same aggregate ID. So history of a given piece of the system, but just a name for it. It's exactly what you need to reconstruct the state of a given aggregate, but not. I don't know if that was exactly the question. So,
yeah, I guess. So, what about event streams and bounded contexts? Do you use one event stream per bounded context?
So, can I ask with a question? How many of you are actually familiar with the concept of bounded context? Okay, it's like 15 people.
not bad.
So what are bounded contexts?
Oh
yeah, okay, that explains.
You won.
So the answer is it's a PHP library.
No, it's a unit of the model which is internally consistent in terms of language and meaning. It's just the portion of the system we can model with no ambiguities. At the given moment, when you expand your knowledge of the system, you end up having ambiguities. An order for the salesperson is something that you can modify at the discount. An order for the customer is something that I bought. An order for the person in the warehouse is what I need to put in the box. Same name, but they are performing different operation on the thing. So that they having different purposes and they are speaking in different languages, but they're using the same word. In a bounded context, a word is used in only one specific meaning. So it has a very specific set of operation and is pretty consistent. You can enforce language rules, knowledge rules, and it's pretty clear. The moment you have ambiguity you're not in a bounded context anymore. So it's the biggest unit of model without ambiguities. Of course, it's pretty good if we can map this language concept to something that could be, let's say, independently deployable, or something that we can map to the people which are asking this. So normally I have one bounded context or one specific purpose, and this normally maps to one specific stakeholder asking me a given functionality. If I need to talk with too many people for the same bounded context, it's not a bounded context, it's already a mess.
Usually in bounded context is not only one aggregate, but you have several aggregates, so you probably need more than one stream per bounded context.
And bounded contexts usually are a good choice for the microservices separation, I think.
That's a really good point. Yeah, so it's one of the best ways to know what you should separate into its own microservice. It's normally a really good idea to have a microservice for each bounded context. Yeah.
So examples probably be like invoicing, accounting, inventory.
It might be a little bit smaller than this. We've been working a lot, especially with people like Matthias Verrais and Cyril Matrer in understanding, like maybe when you talk about invoicing, looks like this is a portion of the problem space, but on the invoicing you might have the need to separate two models. One might be, let's say, the part of billing. The other part might be the part of collecting the money, which might be more like issue tracking, if you get the metaphor. Some issues, some invoices might be pending for ages, while you need to have a different models for creating them quickly. And so you might even have something like, they look like invoices, they have the same data, yes, but the behavior is totally different. You don't change the amount of invoice that you're waiting for 2 years.
So can I have another question? How many of you are using device for authentication? Okay, quite so many. So you all have the user class probably. And how many of you are using the user class for storing the associations to other things? So this is where you actually made a conflict with bounded context. Because you have this, usually in a bigger application, you have a separate concept of authentication and permission system and security. And this is what device is really good about. This is what device brings to us for free. That's great. But then when you start using the class user and the concept of current user, as we all do, and then you have current user dot, I don't know, orders, then you are mixing those two things. And this might be, in bigger applications, it's probably better to make the separation right now. So leave the current user concept, the user class concept, just part of the authentication or security bounded context. And for other parts, you need different concepts. And also just to be clear, because I'm not sure if it was clearly expressed here, using CQRS, using bounded context, using DDD, you will end up with quite a lot of data denormalization, with data duplication. And something that we don't really like in the Rails community, we have this slogan of don't repeat yourself, don't duplicate yourself. And that's the part that comes very hard in our community to accept that some data can be repeated because in different contexts they have different meaning.
In this case, it's not really duplication. That's another thing. It's not a dogma. Do not repeat yourself. It's a trade-off. If it's just you doing the same things over and over, do not repeat yourself. It's just you don't do that. It's stupid. But the cost of communicating between you and yourself is nearly zero. In a team, well, you have to know that somebody else is doing the same thing. So you have a higher communication cost. If you are having something like a date management library and you're having an outsourcing team in India, the cost of knowing you have the same library, it's time. It takes less time maybe to write 2 lines of code than to agree about the version we should use with the team in India. So this is not a dogma. It's a trade-off anyway. But in the small scale, it just maps to a dogma. In the large scale, well, there are different things. And many times, there are different concepts. They just look the same because we think data first. I see delivery date. Then when we looked at it, we just realized that this delivery date might be, oh, for one person, the planned delivery date, and for another person is the actual delivery date. And we're going to discover this only later. There are so many little thing that has just the same label and the same value, but they mean different things. One might be customer expectation. One might be the instruction for the person. And of course, in a system which is working, they should be the same. Otherwise, the company would collapse by random data. But there might be so many cases where this little difference, it might be worth managing. Banking system or even companies with a lot of issues that those little variation may count. It depends on the complexity of the domain, but these are not exactly the same data, only data that looks the same. So do not repeat yourself, and ends up melting things. Then separating things after you melted, tricky.
So you mentioned outsourcing at some point, which is quite an interesting correlation between CQRS and DDD and outsourcing. So it's like different things. We have business-related things here and technical-related things here. But it seems that when you split your system, your large system, into application along the bounded context and you use events heavily, then in my opinion, it might be a good tool for outsourcing different subsystems to different teams. And I think you mentioned that in your talk as well, because it's the same concept, so split into microservices, for example. And some parts of the applications are quite easy to define using when you have the input of the following events, what is the expected state of the database. And it's especially for the read models. So when you have reporting, for example, some kind of complicated reports, and the report is a read model here in this terminology, and then when you handle the events, you expect the data structure at the end to be something, and it's very easy to test and very easy to specify, which means we can. I'm not a huge fan of doing this formal kind of splits, but it means we can have easier outsourcing models for this kind of cooperation.
Yeah, I'm like my comment goes a little bit back to what you were saying, and to the first questions I was asking during the panel. And the thing is that when we let like the tools we're using or the frameworks in case of web applications model, like the way we are gonna design our solution, that's where we probably start making mistakes. So for example, you made a really good example with the user class. So we end up like modeling our solutions around how Rails models the world. So Rails says like you have a table called users and you have an object called users. So everything that's related to a user should be there. But that's like just like creating your solution around how Rails does things, and that might not be like the optimal way for you to solve the problem. So I think that's why I see it's really interesting here, because it's like questioning if the tools we're using are modeling the way we think and we solve our problems, or if we really want to take like be in charge of what we're doing and turn it the other way around. And it's like, okay, I need this. I need the user to mean different things on different contexts. So I'm not gonna be just like tied by how Rails thinks I should do stuff, and just like put everything into the same model, even if what I'm using with that model is like totally breaking a bounded context. What bounded context says I should do.
Can we squeeze in a question from the hackpad? There is an idea that active record is good for the read part, but what would you recommend for the DDD on the write part? So,
just pure Ruby objects with some object-oriented techniques, modeling.
So I'm not sure
you don't need any framework there.
It really becomes a simple thing, because on the right side, your repository is only basically performing a save and find by ID. That's it. You don't have the queries. You don't have all the finders. These are going on the read model. So, what technology do you need to make a find by ID? And of course, you need to rehydrate. But the other thing is just if you separate the read model, most of the data you put in the command doesn't have to be stored in the state of the aggregate. Just passes in the event, and somebody else is putting them in the table. They are not affecting the behavior, so I don't even need to store them in the aggregate persistence. Of course, I need to store the content in the event store, but in the internal state of the aggregate, I don't care. I mean, if a user register to the system. I don't need to have as a behavior if the name, surname, the image, and everything else. I just need to know if it's active or not, if it has been flagged. But it's really, really tiny data. The part which is useful for a reader goes somewhere else, so I don't need finders on the repository side. It's really easy at the end.
Okay. Another technical question. So if your CQRS command saves something and returns the results of that save, would you, despite of this, make another read to get the value, or just use this? Why are you smiling?
Because in my mindset, commands will never return anything. They just execute or not. They execute and return nothing, or they fail.
But do commands compute something?
Yes, and they store it. And that's all.
And then not return it?
Never.
So if you need to return it, you need to make a query.
Okay.
The thing is, it might have variation, which might be useful.
Of course, it can have variation.
Yeah, just don't be locked in. If it feels like your hands are dirty doing this, well, maybe you have a reason. But semantically, I agree with Miro. But you might have legitimate situation where, well, okay, why not? I'm not really following the dogma, or even this, you're not returning anything. Well, but then you have so many technology that makes it look like for the user you just have it quickly on the screen. So why not? But
we had that conversation on Wednesday on .NET user group meeting when somebody asked, what if you want to implement the stack on using CQRS, and how you want to implement the pop operation? And my answer to this is, if you want to implement stack, just use the stack pattern, not CQRS.
Yeah. Just like, how would you eat pizza with the chopsticks? Yeah, good question.
What about chopsticks?
Well, you simply don't, but yeah, just makes you. It's good. I mean, good interview for recruiting.
Yeah, but actually, why not?
You're not hired.
I'm just asking.
It might be worth to mention that sometimes you have the UI representing some kind of form, and in the end, it might result in. I'm not sure if we are in the same. Okay, so I think sometimes we may have situations where one user request, like one HTTP request, can result in multiple commands being run. So it's not always one-to-one, I think. And that's something that, when I understood this part, was much, much easier to get it. So sometimes we have large forms, but they represent different commands.
There's one thing that happened to us while trying to design good commands and good result screens. We ended up talking a lot more with user experience guys, or thinking a lot more like user experience guys. And this is something that normally the DDD community didn't do. And now, to do the right thing, we talk a lot more with the UX guys, because they know what should be the right thing to do a little bit more than we do. And they also know pretty well how to talk with the stakeholders. They ask pretty good questions, only in meetings where we are not around. And so that's one of the things we are trying to improve.
And I also like that if you start talking in commands and actions that user wants to perform, you are building better task-based interfaces. You are not building the Excel clone. Then user just go and edit the things.
So by the way, it might be also worth adding a quick translation. So what CQRS people think as a command, it's often what we call in the Rails community a form object. When people in the CQRS community think about, when they say command handler, what they mean for us, in our world, it's very often a service object. So that's the translation, which is very difficult because a command sounds really much different than a form object.
Yeah, and you're still mixing services because there are two kinds of services: application services and domain services.
Yeah, in the Rails world, we just use services.
But a command is a blue post-it in my implementation.
A what?
A command is a blue sticky.
Why not red?
No.
But why?
No discussion of this. This
We
is
don't
this
go
is
there.
mandatory.
But I like red.
No. Red is for something else. No.
So what's red for?
Paying points, basically. Well, to be totally honest, it's very hard to find real red post-its. You don't find the red.
What about blue then? Oh, you said blue.
What-
Now what about yellow? Sorry.
Well, yellow aggregates.
Because usually you can get the bigger ones.
Okay, so commands are blue, aggregates are yellow.
Yeah, you're getting close. Yeah.
I almost like you watched yesterday presentation.
What about green post-its?
Projections.
Projections.
Another time nobody defined.
How would you define the difference between projections and aggregations?
Well, this little shade of green.
Are you colorblind?
No. The thing is, the aggregate cares about internal behavior, the states which is needed to perform a given operation or not. So let's say if a bank account is blocked, you could not withdraw your money. If it's not blocked, you can. And that's the thing. Of course, you need also the balance, the current status. That's the thing. The projection cares a lot more about how to should I make this data readable for the user. How can I collect information from different sources if needed, or just translate it in a way which is readable for a human that needs to recognize things on the screen? And
So you mean like a presenter?
It's for human or for other system. It's not has to be human.
Yeah, exactly. But for the reader, not for the system doing the actual operation. Yeah. So just.
What about white?
White is a background.
Well, we have something for it. Well, normally we use not the white stickies, but index card for doing quick sketching of the user interface. If somebody is telling, well, for this screen, we really need to have a big picture here, and this information is going to be in red, and we captured this during the meeting. Okay, let's put it on the wall. So, yeah. Any other color? I'm ready.
I'm afraid to ask.
Orange.
What about pink?
External systems.
Okay. All right. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just reminded myself of one thing. So what might be when you have a Rails app, what might be telling you that you may get some gain from CQRS and event sourcing and so on. And those things are, for example, when you do some complex caching. Complex caching usually means that you have those read models not really clear enough, and you try to cache them, and then you have to deal with invalidating the cache, and it's quite complex. So that's one place. And second place is when you have when you use a lot of the presenter pattern. That's again usually you need the presenter pattern when you have a place in your system when you need to show the data, and it doesn't really fit the way you're representing the data in the right model. So the presenter pattern might be a good smell to notice and to turn it into a read model. And the third case is when you have a integration with an external system, not under your control, like we did we've had one with Salesforce, and we had to push some events, push some requests to Salesforce, and then you have all those problems like, what if we push the event? What if we call Salesforce, but they are down, and we need to try to repeat sending the event. And I've seen many implementations of those patterns, how to call the external service again. But usually, what you really need is a good event store and some good way of just repeating the thing. So, with good tools, you get it for free, and that might be a case when you want to look at it.
Okay, our time is up. There are a couple of questions left, so please catch those guys in the break and ask them the questions, especially the technical details, questions, active record, PHP implementation details.
.NET. Okay, one
No,
more thing.
we don't use .NET. We only use PHP.
Okay. One more thing for those who wants to learn more about the colors and the stickers. We'll have an event storming session at the end of the day. Yes. So probably somewhere here outside not the corridor.
I don't know how many people could fit in, but if somebody's curious, we can run the short version just to get the feeling of it and to understand which are some of the key mechanics. Better practicing than just talking or listening. So if you want, just welcome. But we need to be sure about the numbers.
Can we propose the problem to model, or do you already have it selected?
If we have a good domain expert, I mean, if you know the problem well, that's fine. But otherwise, we're gonna get into some problems that we know well enough, but with somebody that knows the hard details. Because it's not like speculating over a model; it's just understanding the real hard part. So if you have something that you know very well, fine.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. Great discussion, guys.